Hello, everybody. My name is Simon Head. I'm the director of Subversives, The History of Lowest to the Low. This is another installment of what will be sort of hopefully an ongoing series of full-length interviews that I did during the years of 2020 to 2023 for this project called Subversives, The History of Lowest to the Low. This one is featuring Mr. Dave Genn. Dave Genn is the guitar player in a band called 5440. He also played in a band with Ron Hawkins, which he talks at more length, which is kind of cool because during the story, kind of the whole Ron Hawkins solo project kind of took a back seat because it was more about the band. It originally was going to have all that stuff, and I realized the thing would probably be like 10 hours long. So that got chopped. This interview was taped on September 26th. It was hooked up by my friend Brent Belke, who said, "You got to talk to Dave Genn. He played in a band with Ron Hawkins." And I did, and it was very cool because I really only just went to go talk to one person. I ended up talking to two more people, and they will eventually, hopefully, make it into this series. Want to let you know that you can still rent the movie on Apple TV in the UK, Ireland, Canada, United States, and Australia. You can also rent the movie on YouTube all around the world. You can also buy the Blu-ray, which is out on Unobstructed View. You can pick it up at Sunrise Records in Canada. You can just search the movie with Blu-ray attached, and you'll be able to find it. It's on Amazon. Thank you so much. Everybody who had purchased this movie, who had downloaded the movie, who gave me nice words of encouragement. So without further ado, here is my full-length interview with Dave Genn from 5440 from September 26th. We'll see you again.
I'm 4 years younger than Ron.
Yeah. Young guy in the band.
But I do think it's kind of funny to be talking about 1993.
30, almost 30 years.
28 years ago.
Years.
Hey, let's go back 28 years. Tell me all about that.
And by the way, you had 2 days to prepare for this.
Well, I prepared by calling Ron, and the funny thing is that like I was trying to remember. Like, I remember the Hallucinogenia session, and I can tell the story of that.
Yeah.
But I have very, very little recollection of those other 3 records, like where we did them.
The ones following.
Yeah, the Hey Valerie EP, The Secret of My Excess, and Greasing the Star Machine. I have a vague memory of recording with Andy at like a Foley studio.
Yeah, it was with Andy.
Yeah.
Koyama.
Yeah.
That's how Shakespeare was recorded.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's where we were doing this stuff. But I did 3 records. I can't remember like.
Yeah. That was pre-Hallucinogenia then. That was like right after Shakespeare.
No. This is after. This is the solo Ron stuff.
Right.
The 3 solo Ron records were made in like Foley houses in Toronto.
Koyama told the story because he recorded Shakespeare, but it's like he didn't really explain the sort of the after. He just sort of said, yeah, and then we sort of did some stuff.
Yeah.
This is filling in the parts.
Yeah, we were kind of recording like on off hours and Sundays, and Andy, I guess, had a gig in film and television doing some Foley and stuff, so he would have access to those studios. But I have very little recollection of where, when, how those records were done. I think I kind of remember Hey Valerie. Or maybe I remember Excess. But I mean, I talked to Ron in order to kind of see if I could jog my memory. Yeah. And it was very difficult. Yeah. Also, the Stephen and Ron came out when I was doing the Art Bergman record.
It was Fresh Hell, right?
Yeah, Fresh Hell. We were doing it at the Sony building, and they came and they sang backing vocals on that. I remember that as well.
Yep.
They came and sang harmonies.
Did well, let's say you know this to start. Like the first time you met Ron, do you have a memory and how this all worked out?
Yeah, I do. So I was playing keyboards with Art Bergman, and Art had just switched management to Frank Weipert, and I guess Frank had maybe tipped me off that there was a band from Toronto that was very popular out there, but unheard of on the West Coast, who was in Vancouver to record a record with Don Smith at Greenhouse Studios. And they were playing a show down at the Town Pump. So I went down by myself and to check out this band. And I remember very distinctly they walked on stage with like plaid and Doc Martens and long greasy hair, and the singer had a green mohawk, and I was expecting them to unleash a barrage of Seattle-flavored grunge, maybe mixed with the Exploited because of the green mohawk. And instead, they played a very jangly, tuneful, lyrically extremely advanced form of rock and roll that I found really intriguing. Loved the show, and then after the show, when they left the stage, I went up and I introduced myself to the guy with the green mohawk, and I said, I'm Dave, I play keyboards with Art Bergman, I understand you're in town recording. If you need any keyboards on your record, give me a call, I'd love to come down. So about a few weeks later, I get a phone call, would you be interested in coming down and playing some keys on the Lowest of the Low record? And that session was interesting because I walked into the control room. The band was sitting there with Rod Michaels, the engineer, who I'd worked with at that studio before with my band DSK. There was no sign of Don Smith, and I said, "Where's the producer?" They said, "Oh, he's upstairs. He's prepping for the Rolling Stones right now, so he's on the phone." I'm like, "Okay." So I go into the recording room and I sit down at the Hammond, and we're do the first song. I think the first song was maybe City Full of Cowards. And then we're about halfway through Dogs of February, and through the glass I see this guy with like crazy hair and a bandana, and I go, that must be Don Smith. And he comes in and he stands there for about 15 seconds listening to what I'm doing, and then he turns, and I can see he tells Rod to stop tape, and he presses the talkback mic and he says, "Pull some drawbars or something." Turns around, goes back upstairs. So that was the extent of the production advice I got from the legendary Don Smith, was pull some drawbars or something. And that was my introduction to Ron and the Low.
Yeah. So maybe reflect a little bit about, like, because you did reflect on his songwriting, but how, like, from the, did you hear of Shakespeare? Because I know Shakespeare was sort of like an inherent, like, East Coast.
Yeah. Totally unaware. Yeah. Totally unaware of that record when I saw the Low just as they were about to record Hallucinogenia. I was completely unaware of the band. They were very much a Toronto and University, Ontario phenomenon that had not reached the West Coast. I'm not even sure if they ever did reach the West Coast, did they?
The Low?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's some interviews with them with Music West, with Jay Myris.
Yep.
That I saw just snippets of it,
Yep.
and then I know Jay. I've known Jay for like many years.
Yeah.
I said, "Jay, can you get that footage?" And he goes, "It's all locked away in Much Music. We can't get it."
Yeah.
So, and it costs a lot of money. But there is them. They did. You know what I mean? There is some.
What I'm saying is that, like, they were never nearly the phenomenon in Vancouver that they were on Queen Street, and also amongst the universities. So,
do you think there was like a divide in the scene about? There was a divide just for pure geography, but in those days there was a West Coast and a Toronto, not a rivalry, but just definitely, because I know that a punk rock like a No Means No would come to Toronto and people are like, meh, but they're like the best fucking band ever. Like, but you go to Victoria and see No Means No, it's like a fucking stadium show type thing,
Yeah.
that vibe.
I think that back then, like 30 years ago, things were far more regional because we didn't have the internet that sort of was the great equalizer. Also, the Low were very, lyrically Toronto-centric, right? Which is like, it's like wearing a Leafs jersey here in Vancouver. It's like everybody goes, "Oh, I don't know, I'm not interested in that," right? But I was once we made the Hallucinogenia record, Art Bergman played a lot of shows with the Low out in Ontario. At, we played Lee's and the Horseshoe, and we played all sorts of colleges and universities around Ontario, and their following was rabid. and I was very intrigued with their phenomenal success, and not just people coming out to the show, but people coming out and knowing every word, like singing along to every single lyric, and they're not easy lyrics to memorize, you know.
Yeah. The interesting thing is that they had the title of largest, highest selling independent record and got beat by Bare Naked Ladies, and they were on the same label.
Yeah.
Like, what's that? It's weird.
Yeah.
It was the time and a place. It was the industry, and I think I mentioned a little bit about the culture shift in the music scene and how things went from inherently metal, hair metal, pretty boy stuff into dark, dirty, weird.
Yeah.
And you lived it, we lived it, I lived it. So like maybe just sort of describe it. It wasn't just like a light switch going off. There was like a slow transition. And
oh, well, that's where I kind of disagree. I think that you know, September of '91, when Nevermind dropped, there was really a very obvious sea change. Particularly, I noticed it in LA because I was in a band that was traveling back and up and down the West Coast at that time. And, you know, we went down in June of '91 and everybody looked like Warrant. And then we went down in October of '91 and everybody had stopped teasing their hair and they were wearing flannel and docks and the spandex was gone. And if you looked like Poison, you were so uncool. And, you know, that was really the last cultural zeitgeist. I think that in the case of the Low, you know, they weren't making grunge music and they weren't making metal music. They were not playing anything that was particularly macho, and that was a very macho time for music, whether you're talking about Rage Against the Machine or you're talking about, you know, Soundgarden. It was all very a lot of testosterone. And the Low were a little bit, you know, they were a little bit more, or a lot more lyrical, melodic, jangly, bouncy, you know.
Yeah. Did you, like, obviously, just probably might not be, but you can relate to it in some way, I'm sure of it, where a major label came calling, and they basically was like 8 middle fingers saying, no, we're not selling out, and, you know, we can carry that into the career, into, like, today of the band.
Yeah.
But just, you know, I'm sure there was, like, a time in your life where it was like, major label was like, we think you got what it takes, kid, and we're going to take you all the way up to, so just, I know the disdain in that, you know, because if you have some sort of moral compass on what music and art is, you're just going to go, fuck off, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
But that's what they did.
Yeah.
Was it a good part of their career? Was it the best decision they made? Probably not. But maybe just sort of, I know it's not even a question.
Isn't it funny we reflect on that sort of, that ideology now of that, you know, the DIY, no selling out, corporate rock sucks, we're not taking cigarette money, we're not taking beer money, we're not touring with that band because they suck, all that stuff, right? Unheard of now. You know, the kids, if there are kids in bands now, they're like, sell out? Oh, yes, please. Yeah. Where's the sponsorship money? Where's the free shoes? We're in. And, you know, everybody, I think, back then who was making rock music had at least a bit of it. I know that 5440 was like refusing to take Belvedere cigarette money or refusing to take Molson money, even though these were advantages to being able to tour in markets that you wouldn't necessarily get to without some support. The Low were, you know, they were very much stick to their guns, an ideology. You know, the interesting thing is when I first started getting to know Ron, I found him absolutely fascinating because, you know, my sheltered upper middle class West Coast upbringing had never afforded me the opportunity to meet a militant socialist. And Ron, at age 26, 27, and his girlfriend Catherine were absolutely fascinating to me because they were militantly socialist, totally fully formed in their political positions, and the more they drank, the more militant they got, and they loved to drink.
Yeah.
And it was they were very interesting because I had no political knowledge or affiliation at that point, and to meet somebody who was young but still so sure of their position was very, very interesting to me.
Mm-hmm. Influential, maybe?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Ron really, in the van, he really educated me to, he made me aware of, the injustices that he found to be important, and really opened my eyes to a world outside of my little West Coast bubble.
You've already sort of talked a little bit about the magic of the band and the live show, and how people are so excited about seeing a show. It's sort of as a person who mixes it, it's one of those last times where it's like there's an event happening. It seems like that doesn't happen anymore. Like there's not like it's not like Zeppelin's rolling into town kind of vibe, But can you sort of describe sort of like that feeling of everybody being in together? It might not be out here, but maybe when you're out east.
Yeah, I mean, again, my introduction to the Low was I saw a show, hadn't heard of them before. I got to know their music really through their records, and then being back east with Art and opening shows for the Low on Queen Street and in the universities, I was absolutely fascinated by how the lyrics especially resonated with the audience and how familiar people were with the words. And I think that is really the thing that makes the Low stand out. And this is one thing that I really recognized when Gord Downie got sick. And I was reflecting on, the power of the hip and how they are so intertwined with our national cultural fabric. The Low are very similar to the hip in that it's very difficult to pinpoint bands where arguably the strongest element of the ensemble are the lyrics. You can say that about a lot of solo artists. You can name tons of solo artists where their lyrics are the strongest part of the package. But there are very few bands, rock bands, where you can say the lyrics are the strongest part of the package. The hip are one, arguably the Low are another one, where there's the lyrics and then everything is there to support it. Whereas as opposed to a flashy guitar solo or a good groove or like a feeling or an emotion of the track, and then or a great melody or great harmonies, whatever it is, whatever the different elements to make a great band are. But it's rare that it's the lyrics that are first and foremost, and that's the case with the Low. They're a unicorn in that way, and you put them in the same category as the hip for that reason, where the words come first.
Yeah. There was an interesting part of the conversation with Frank yesterday as to why the hip and the Low never really clicked in a way, based on the fact that there was an artist, a lyrical genius in both bands.
You would think.
But it was like a hockey thing, maybe. Maybe you're just jocks or something. But they had like one of the most sensitive lyricists in the hip, and arguably the same. Why they didn't just? It's like that relationship that never happened. Like, I don't think they ever played a show together. I don't even think they even hung out together and had beers.
That first incarnation of the Low did not last long.
Yeah, and they probably didn't want to be associated to that type of. But maybe back in the early days, this have nothing to do with anything, but maybe it's because when they had like early hip records were kind of like populated by jocks, and you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's what sort of turned the Low off to the saying, well, because they've had turned down shows and tours with bands because they didn't believe in the band or the people that watched it.
It's not the band I hate, it's their fans.
Exactly, that's it. Like they've canceled Violent Femmes shows, Bryan Adams shows, probably Hip shows, but this is segueing, but into sort of like maybe it was not such a good idea in hindsight, or is this the key to their longevity? Is to do that in their early part of the career, to have this sort of edge to them.
Well, they certainly had they had such a Washington hardcore type of attitude about what they did, but they weren't making Washington hardcore. They were making something far more commercially viable, far more easily digestible by the masses, and yet they were still taking this stance like we're Fugazi. Did that hinder their success? I think inarguably it did stop them from reaching a wider audience. But it also, for all intents and purposes, made diehard fans who respected them for digging their heels in and doing what they believed. Whether it was right or wrong, that's 20/20 hindsight. We'll never know. We'll never know. But again, that band shone very, very bright for a very short time. Obviously, there's been other incarnations and reunions and reformations and different guys going through the band. But, that first incarnation, there was certainly something very, very magic about it. And I think both those records still stand up. I mean, obviously, Shakespeare gets all the attention, and Hallucinogenia was out of print for a long, long time, tough to find, tough to hear. And although I know the experience of making the record was a tough one for the band, there's still great songs on it. Great words, and I'm very, very proud to have had a small part of that record.
Mm-hmm. So band breaks up. Obviously, you were sort of not in the part of it, but you played all the solo stuff. You played in solo acts or solo recordings as well as touring.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe talk a little bit, because he must have. I mean, obviously, it's like you don't want to go, oh, and then he said this about the band or this. We don't, you know what I mean? Like, we're not going there. But I mean, he obviously had to do something to change something, and then eventually bring it back around to know where his quote unquote bread was buttered. But that time of touring where he's reaching out to learn about new types of music is obviously part of this big story of like getting back together with the Low and
So I had made right when the Low broke up in 94.
Yeah.
So Hallucinogenia came out in spring of 94. They broke up by about November of 94. And then right after they broke up, my phone rings and Ron's like, I want to make an EP with just some keyboards and some percussion and me strumming an acoustic guitar. Can you come out to Toronto and do it? So we made the Hey Valerie EP. It was basically Ron and myself and Christopher Plock. And then we did a couple of tours across Canada. The three of us as a trio. And this was interesting for Ron because he came out of a rock band with a very standard setup, bass, drums, 2 guitars, 2 voices. And he proceeded to go out on the road and do a couple of cross-Canada tours with a piano player and a sax player. So completely turning it on its head. The next year, we made The Secret of My Excess, that I played keyboards on, and then Greasing the Star Machine, which I also played all the keys on. So, including Hallucinogenia, I think I made 4 records with Ron over 5 years through the mid-90s. And did a couple of heavy lifting cross Canada tours. Actually, the second tour that we did was which was Chris Plock and Ron and myself in the Teamworks van across the country. And the Teamworks van was breaking down all the way across. And I can remember leaving Winnipeg to do an overnight drive down to Toronto to make a Toronto show, or maybe, I guess we were making a Toronto show, and had to drive overnight out of Winnipeg. And the van was basically just stalling. And it actually stalled and came to rest on train tracks, like sitting on the train tracks, and we couldn't get it started. And we're sitting on the tracks. And I think we had to like get out and like push it off the tracks. And we got it going again. Driving through Northern Ontario, I think we crossed the Manitoba-Ontario border, and it's like snowing and freezing, and the van keeps on breaking down. And finally it breaks down for the last time, and we pull off onto this side road, and we're like, it's minus 15, minus 20. We're like, are we gonna die out here? And we look down the road, and we can see an OPP station within about a couple of 100 meters. So we start walking down the number one, get the OPP station, and we get to the door, and we look in the window, and it's like, Dear Penthouse Forum. I never thought it would happen to me, but there's 2 cops in there, and they're both beautiful young women in full uniform. And Ron goes, I better go in there and tell them what's going on. I said, actually, I think I should probably go in there and just inform them. She goes, no, I think I should probably be the one. I'm the singer. I should probably go tell them. Anyway, it didn't turn into a Penthouse Forum letter, but they were very amused by these 3 musicians in the middle of the night, in the middle of Northern Ontario, showing up and going, our van's dead. Sure enough, it got towed to a shop somewhere in Northern Ontario there, and I can remember sitting outside there as the sun was, basically as the sun was coming up, waiting for this thing to get fixed so we could make it down to Toronto for the next show.
Needless to say, you didn't make the next show because it would have been the next day, right?
I can't really remember what happened there, but I do remember it was like that. There was a
25-hour drive.
Pretty sketchy. It was a pretty sketchy evening.
Yeah.
Overnight without a working vehicle in Northern Ontario in winter.
Well, even though there was some hardships like that, did you feel that there was a breath of fresh air in his approach to music, or was it like the same Ron? Like, was there any change in his attitude about being on tour? Because I know him and Steve always had like this war that they broke up like daily, but was there sort of like a new bounce in the step?
Absolutely. I think just by the way he wanted to arrange his new music for instruments that he hadn't had available to him with the low, piano-driven, Hammond-driven, saxophone, hand percussion. He wanted to frame his lyrics in a way that wasn't in a standard rock format. Even with the Secret of My Excess and the Rusty Nails, lots of horns and kind of more of a sort of jazzy big band feel to it. He was really, I think, at that point, really inspired to not be, I don't want to say handcuffed, but not having to adhere to the sort of standard rock band format of 2 guitars, bass, and drums. I think that was quite inspiring. For him, and I think he was quite energized at the time by playing with new musicians, and I was too. I mean, I was just thrilled to be playing with somebody that just was such a great writer. Yeah. Great. When somebody writes words that good, then it's an honor to have the opportunity to support them with whatever musicianship I happen to find myself with at that point in my career.
And he doesn't read music.
Yeah, in rock and roll, that's not necessary. Not as Paul McCartney.
Well, he didn't even he doesn't know chord structure. Like, he just, whatever he makes out is all, I know, it's like one of those things you're like, wow, at least somebody who's been doing it for a while kind of goes, what's that? That's an A.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, he never, even to this day.
Well, Paul McCartney and Eddie Van Halen, both musically illiterate as well, so.
Yeah, I guess it doesn't really
Doesn't really matter. Although it's nice to have somebody in your camp who's literate, but it's not necessary. I mean, rock and roll is it's about a feeling, and you don't need to be able to read in order to get that feeling across.
Yeah, it's for me because I took theory and piano and I learned music from playing piano. To me, it's like alien. You know what I mean? It's like you need, John Sutton, Weaker Thans?
Yeah.
He can play other songs he's never heard before because he understands progressions of chords. Just from a feeling, he knows that this goes to that. It's either going to be one of these two things. And he played in my band for like a couple of weeks, and he filled in, and he was just playing the songs.
Yeah.
But that's sort of like this magic of like, I don't know. To me, it's this.
I'm usually seeking out collaborators who are raw like that.
Yeah.
Who play and write by feel. What chords are you playing there? I don't know. This one and this one.
Yeah.
They sound great.
Yeah.
Good work.
Yeah, I guess if your brain doesn't hear it correctly, it corrects, and that's, it doesn't need to, maybe that's more simplified than trying to work out the theory of why this is happening. It's like more of like a sixth sense as opposed to using your knowledge of music.
I think that when you're looking for collaborators, a lot of times the most successful creative relationships I've had have been with people who don't necessarily know what they're doing, but they have a gift for marrying a great lyric to a great melody. And then I feel it's my place to help support that as best I can with whatever theoretical knowledge I happen to possess.
So we're kind of rounding the corner, but describe in your words the legacy of Lowest of the Low. Like, how have they transcended into being a 90s gutter snipey poet rock band into possibly one of the most, one of them influential Canadian I'm biased, but like someone who's kept going in all these years and not been like a jaded old prick. And Ron's not that, and we know a few of them, and I'm sure we know the same people, but the legacy of the band. Is there any sort of way to sum that up in a few sentences?
It's a tricky one, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it would have been a very, very difficult place to be to have Shakespeare put on that pedestal. Like, if you can remember in the early 90s, mid 90s, every single sort of magazine poll, best Canadian records ever, that record was always very, very high up. That is a very difficult legacy to live up to. And it's not necessary, it's Ron's songs today are just as good, if not better, than in 1991. But, when something is of a time and it sort of catches a spark, right time, as we know, rock and roll is so timing based, being in the right place, right time, doing the right thing. It's a blessing and a curse. You've made this classic record 30 years ago that's still considered a Canadian classic. One of the greatest, if not greatest, records made about Toronto. And then you've got to live up to that. For a long time, Ron wasn't playing any songs from that record. And he's also, and I've had this conversation with him as well, as, he's also done a very, very good job over the last 30 years of diluting his brand. One day he's playing with the Lowest of the Low, and then the next day he's playing with the Rusty Nail, and the next day he's playing with the Do Good Assassins, and the next day it's a Ron Hawkins solo record, and then the next day it's back to the Lowest of the Low with some new members, and then it's back to, and then he's got a cello, and, these are all songs that are his voice, and yet he's branded it so many different ways. It's not the best business model I've ever encountered in rock and roll. And I've talked to him about it, and he's just kind of shrugged. To your point, not jaded, not bittered, no regrets. Nice place to be.
Yeah.
I wish we could all be there. It's this business will wear us all down eventually, and your survival techniques are varied. And Ron's survival technique has been to just keep creating, keep being positive, keep mining his creative psyche for new ideas and new ways of supporting his lyrics, becoming an incredible painter, an incredible visual artist, becoming a dad. It's pretty impressive. And yes, you're right, like not bitter, totally positive, engaged, creatively inspired. It's a really good example for all of us, I think.
That's great. Now, you've said some words. Do you agree with all the words, and can I use it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes someone might say, I don't want to say all that and take it all back, and I just make sure that, if you're comfortable with it, then it's like, I'm sure everything you've said is obviously...
Yeah, I mean... I'll tell you one other thing, another story that I found, a conversation that I had with Ron. I can't remember. It might have been right after. It was when I was working with him right after the Low broke up, and we were talking about songwriting splits in the band, and that he had split all the songs 4 ways, the band members. And I said to him, like, wait a sec, you write the songs, right? And he goes, oh yeah, Steven has a few songs every record, but yeah, I write, I come in with a complete song, all the chords, all the melodies, all the lyrics, it's my song. And I said, and then you split it with the other 3 guys? And he goes, yeah. And I said, well, that's pretty on point. You're a socialist, that makes sense. Everybody gets the same. But why? They're your songs. Like, I can understand a good way of keeping a band together is giving everybody a taste of that revenue stream. A good way to break up a band is take it all when you're the writer.
Yeah.
Sooner,
That's a good one.
Yeah. And then next thing you know, everybody's left you and you got to hire some new guys. I said, why would you do that? Why would you split everything evenly with the guys who don't write? And he said, I remember this so clearly. He said, Dave Alexander designs the posters and he designs the album covers, and he's got a great eye for visual art. And John Arnott rents the van and deals with the manager and makes sure that the hotels are booked. He's like, I don't want to do that shit. And that stuff is I just write songs. I'm going to write songs anyway. I don't want to do that shit. I don't want to book the hotels. And it's worth it to me for them to do that so I can be busy writing songs. So I'm happy to split that revenue stream.
Yeah.
I thought that was that was very eye-opening for me in my early 20s. It's like, oh yeah, this is like, there's more to keeping a band together. Not that they did a wonderful job of that, but there's more to keeping a band together than just like writing good songs. There's a lot of machinery because, most of the day is not writing songs or playing shows. It's sitting in the van or finding the bar or, finding food or making sure that everything's running reasonably effectively. A conversation that I had with Ron this week is I said, how much of the demise of the first incarnation of the Low can be attributed to the fact that you guys were just grinding it out back and forth across the country, across the frozen tundra in a shitty van? Like, and Ron agreed, like, that's part of it. That's part of it. Just like got sick of sitting beside that guy all day, every day for years in a highly stressful, you know, you're broke, you're under pressure, you're exhausted, and there is unlimited bad habits at your disposal anytime you like. And if you don't take a break every once in a while, it can be a recipe for disaster, and it was disaster.
Yeah, and there's also dealing with people in the business. They were very wary of the people they worked with.
Yeah.
And they went through people that, if they didn't have a good sense about it, that was it. You're out. You're out of the family, you know.
Yeah.
And Canada's a small industry.
Yeah.
People get to know who you are real fast.
Yes.
And if you're going to be a prick in business, you better damn well write some good songs and make a lot of people a lot of money.
In Canada, reputations are earned and they stick. Yeah. It's very, very difficult to shake a reputation. Yeah. And I don't think necessarily that Ron or the Lowe's reputations were shitty, but I don't think they were necessarily considered easy.
Very difficult.
Yeah, they said no to a lot. They said no to a lot of things that I don't know if Ron would say in hindsight he should have said yes to them. He probably would not. He would probably say, nope, I made the right call there.
Well, he's still here talking behind a camera, doing, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it worked out, you know?
Yeah.
Dave Alexander has a few, like, I wish we got to, because he wanted them to remix and re-release Shakespeare My Butt before Hallucigenia.
Yeah.
And David says, in hindsight, that would have been a good move. You know, and even Andy Koyama said, well, the original plan was to record this and then have some big producer come and fuck it up. It's the exact words from it.
Right.
So maybe the hindsight is maybe they just listen more and take advice from people without having their guards up. That might have been helpful.
Yeah, I don't remember Ron being an advice taker in the early 90s.
No.
He was very opinionated, and his opinions were well formed.
Okay.
You know, again, when I first met him, I was very intrigued at just like how fully formed his political positions were, and how he would defend them to the death.
Yeah. He was already 10 years into it too.
Yes.
When you would have met him.
That's right.
So.
That's right. He'd had a lot of practice. Yeah. I mean, it was a very interesting time. It was a very exciting time back then. But I mean, to your point, like, there was a very different attitude about ethics, what you would do or not do in fear of being labeled a sellout, being a slave to corporate rock. Mm-hmm. And that attitude does not exist now. You know, the musicians in their early 20s now, that's not even a consideration.
Yeah. Did you hear the story when they got signed to Warner Brothers? Ron wrote this sort of quasi-jokey, thank you, Warner Brothers, for full... I don't know the words of it. He's going to read it. I haven't read it yet, but something to the effect of, well, thank you for bowing to every need of ours. And the publicity part of the company went, what the fuck is going on here? Who does this guy think he is?
Yeah.
And it's Steve from Warner. He's like, it's a joke.
Yeah.
It's a joke.
Yeah.
But, and what you were saying about splitting money, I recorded a live album for them, and they're cutting me in as a fifth. It's like, who the fuck does that?
Socialists.
Yeah. I know. It's like, it's just a nice, not even just this, it's just me, it's just a gesture of like, here you go. Thanks. I said, dude, all he did was hit record. I brought my laptop and I hit record in 3 shows. So,
Well, yeah, but Ron doesn't want to do that,
yeah, I know.
although he's capable of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's very difficult to describe to the youth of today, like what the temperature was 30 years ago, as far as and really, I mean, Nirvana's success and the sort of the rise of alternative music in the early 90s, when it was just sort of a cottage industry that like basically became culture. Thank God. It really informed and supported this attitude of like DIY, no help from the suits, not taking money from the beer companies, not doing anything that could possibly label us as careerists, right? Anti-careerists. And Nirvana's success with that attitude just basically reinforced everybody's position already, and they dug their heels in even more, including the Low.
Yeah.
And I mean, we could second guess all day long whether could they have become U2 if they just sort of said yes to a few more things. We'll never know.
Yeah.
Never know.
Yeah. There's this inherent, my personal feeling is like, they're my band. Yeah. I don't want to share my band.
I think a lot of people feel that way.
Yeah, yeah, and that's sort of like the magic that doesn't really exist these days. Like, it's because that Justin Bieber guy, he's my guy.
Yeah.
I love him so much. You don't like there's almost like I used to play in a band with Jason Tate from the Weaker Vans.
Yep.
We played in Red Fisher together.
Yeah.
So when Weaker Vans put their first record out, they stayed at my apartment when they mixed Fallow. And I'm like, this is great. I'm going to be part of this. This is so cool. And then all of a sudden they started getting more and more popular. And it really, the elitist in me was like, oh man, they're my band.
Yeah.
You can't like them, But I soon let that go. But it was a very brief period of time. Going, wait, hold on a second. You guys you're supposed to be my band. And that happens with the Low. There is a magic there of like, they're just ours.
Yes. Well, yes. I think that's very true about the Low. I think that because they never, although they made the biggest independent record of the era, they were still essentially a very successful cult band. And again, like shockingly regional in a way that doesn't exist now, with the great, the internet being the great leveler. It's you don't have the regional successes that we did 30 years ago, where a band could be huge in Ontario and unheard of in Vancouver, and vice versa. There's certainly examples of Vancouver bands that were, for lack of a better term, rock stars on Water Street, but couldn't get arrested on Queen Street.
Yeah. There was the great divide of Winnipeg.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, you could see Sam I Am in front of great crowds up until Winnipeg, and as soon as they hit Thunder Bay, crickets.
Yeah.
They couldn't get arrested in Toronto. One of my favorite bands of all time. But, and that's another thing. It's like, well, that's okay. I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Because I could see him at the El Macombo with 10 other people.
Yeah.
This is great.
Yeah.
But there's that moment of the regional part of it. That's something to sort of dig into maybe on this thing. Is like, because there was a regional, everybody had their scene. And the magic of that is that you'd come in from, as an outsider, into that scene, and they would bring you in. But for some reason, there was some band on the periphery of that scene getting fucked every time.
Yeah.
Let the kids know.
Yeah.
But you'd roll into town from into Regina from Winnipeg, and you're like the fucking king of the, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you're not from their scene, they bring you in.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen anymore. Maybe it does. Maybe because that's old guy talk, right? Maybe that actually does happen.
Well, there is there's the name of your movie, Old Guy Talk.
Old guy talk. Get off my yard.
Yeah. Yeah, again, I just think, we're talking about a different time. Mm-hmm. We're talking about a different time. My experience with the Low was they had already had this massive success in Ontario with Shakespeare when I saw them for the first time. And when I saw them the first time, I'd never heard of them or heard any of their songs, and I hadn't heard Shakespeare. And they were already a phenomenon in Toronto. So 5,000 kilometers away on the West Coast, I'm like, I don't know who these guys are.
You heard of Babe the Blue Ox?
Yep.
They were one of my favorite bands. I saw them at Bottom of the Hill in San Francisco.
Yep.
And it was like, this is my favorite band. You know, I mail ordered the CD. You know, and it's like, yeah, one of the greatest bands I've ever seen live.
Yeah.
In this little tiny club. But the same feeling is like, could that I don't go out enough to really go and discover magic.
Mm-hmm.
But that's one thing they could lay down in spades is just magic shows, just a show that people remember. People remember some shows like in Kitchener, Waterloo that the Low played, and they'll talk about it at great length about how awesome it was. You know? It doesn't happen anymore.
Again, old guy talk.
Old guy talk.
But
get off my lawn. That's the subtitle of
the great thing about art, probably the greatest thing about art, is that it is timeless and it lives on beyond us. And if you are lucky enough to create something exceptional, it's timeless. You know, Shakespeare, arguably Hallucinogenia, those are timeless records. You put them on now and they still sound fresh. They still have that energy that feels immediate. And that doesn't wane with time. It's a snapshot of that era and that point in Ron's life, in all of their lives, in the band's life. And it's you know, it's I don't want to say a fossil, but it's definitely a bookmark of that era and that time. And you know, I think that when you go see the Low now, and if you're lucky enough to sort of see them from the perspective of the band, if you can sort of sneak into the wings or get a spot at their show where you're facing the audience, not the band, and you see how many people are still singing those words and how important they are and how those words and songs still stand up, I think it's just a testament to just a really great ensemble working together at a time when they were all on the same page and focused on what they were doing and had a very clear vision of what it was they were and supported it.
Amazing, man. This is great.
You got what you got?
I think I got what I got.
You want to tell Art Bergman stories now?
I can press stop so you won't get sued.
No, I'm not telling Art Bergman story. Art wouldn't sue me. He couldn't.
He couldn't. He's got no lawyers. You'd have to hire a lawyer. He's got no money to do that.
Oh.